he was always Dad. I mean, he wasn't funny all the time. Sometimes he was just downright morose.
The spotlight catches Karen Knott's mid-gesture, her face contorting into that unmistakable bug-eyed expression her father made famous. The audience erupts in laughter, recognition washing over them like a warm wave. But then her voice drops to a whisper, trembling slightly as she touches her face. "I look so much like my dad," she says, and suddenly the laughter feels different, tender, melancholic, weighted with something unspoken. This is more than a tribute show. This is confession wrapped in comedy, a daughter finally ready to reveal what happened in those final moments when America's beloved nervous wreck faced his own mortality. Don Knotts spent his entire career making people laugh. From the bumbling Deputy Barney Fife,
"We got to nip it! Nip it in the bud! Nip it!"
to countless bug-eyed characters who turned anxiety into art, he was a man who weaponized vulnerability. Millions knew him as the lovable fool who couldn't load his own gun, the sidekick with a heart too big for his tiny frame. But behind those wide eyes and that trembling voice lived a man carrying pain so deep it threatened to swallow him whole. For years, Karen kept silent about what her father said and did as he lay dying. The memory felt too intimate, too strange, perhaps even inappropriate. How do you tell the world that your father, legendary comedian, 5-time Emmy winner, American icon, spent his last conscious moments doing exactly what he'd done his entire life? How do you admit that you ran from his deathbed not because you couldn't bear the sadness, but because you couldn't stop laughing? The truth Karen finally shares isn't what anyone expects. It's not a tale of regret or reconciliation speeches. It's not about wealth squandered or relationships destroyed. The awful truth is far more complex, far more human, and somehow far more beautiful than any Hollywood ending could provide. It's about a man so committed to his craft, so determined to leave this world on his own terms, that he turned his final breaths into one last performance. The man who made millions laugh had one final joke, and one final truth. And understanding both means going back to the beginning, to a frightened little boy in West Virginia who learned that laughter could be armor, salvation, and ultimately, legacy. Morgantown, West Virginia in the 1920s was a town carved from coal and hardship, where hope came in small doses and joy was a luxury few could afford. Into this gray world came Jesse Donald Knotts in 1924, the youngest of 4 children born into a household where violence lurked behind every door. His father, a farmer who never recovered from the trauma of war, suffered from schizophrenia and alcoholism, a devastating combination that turned their home into a battlefield. Young Don learned early that silence could be survival, that making yourself small meant escaping notice. But sometimes smallness wasn't enough. The boy who would one day master the art of comic trembling learned that particular skill authentically, watching his father's unpredictable rages, once even fleeing from a knife-wielding threat that seared itself into his memory forever. His mother, worn down by poverty and fear, did her best to shield her children, but she was fighting a losing battle against circumstances she couldn't control. In this chaos, Don found refuge in imagination, creating worlds where he held power, where laughter replaced terror, where a frightened child could become anything at all. Then there was Sid, his older brother, the family's first comedian. Sid possessed a natural gift for making people laugh, for finding light in their collective darkness. He became Don's hero, showing him that humor could transform pain into something bearable, even beautiful. But when Sid died from asthma at just a young age, Don didn't just lose a brother, he lost his North Star. The grief carved something hollow inside him, a space that would spend decades trying to fill itself with applause and approval. In Sid's absence, Don found another companion, a ventriloquist dummy he named Danny. Through Danny, the terrified child discovered he could speak without fear of retribution. He could make people laugh without putting himself at risk. The dummy became his shield and his weapon, his first taste of the control that performance could provide. At talent shows and church gatherings, Little Don Knotts and Danny brought joy to audiences who had precious little of it. By high school, he'd refined his defense mechanism into an art form. The scared boy became the class clown, winning popularity through perfectly timed jokes and self-deprecating charm. His classmates elected him president, validation that laughter could buy love, or at least its convincing imitation. But late at night, alone in his room, he was still that frightened child, still waiting for the next explosion, still trying to earn safety through performance. If the real world was cruel, Don decided, he would build one where laughter ruled instead. It was a decision born from trauma, refined by loss, and destined to bring joy to millions who never knew the price he paid for their smiles. New York City in the early 1940s had no patience for shy dreamers from West Virginia. Don's first attempt to conquer the entertainment capital of the world ended in crushing defeat. The city that never slept didn't stay awake for one more anxious comedian with a dummy and a dream. Broke, humiliated, and uncertain, he retreated home. But not for long. World War II interrupted his plans, though perhaps not in the way it did for most young men. Don Knotts went to war not with a rifle, but with jokes. Assigned to the Pacific Theater, he became part of a special entertainment unit called Stars and Gripes, performing for soldiers who desperately needed distraction from the horrors surrounding them. On makeshift stages built from ammunition crates, in sweltering tents where men faced the very real possibility of never seeing home again, Don learned something profound. Laughter could be medicine. Comedy could be courage. He performed throughout the Pacific, earning decorations and medals that recognized humor as a form of service. These weren't participation trophies. They were acknowledgments that keeping morale alive mattered, that making men laugh before they went into battle was its own kind of heroism. The experience transformed him, showing him that his gift had genuine value, that entertainment wasn't frivolous but essential to the human spirit. Returning from war, Don enrolled at West Virginia University, nominally pursuing an education degree but really chasing stage time wherever he could find it. He joined every theatrical production available, refined his timing, studied what made audiences lean forward or explode with laughter. And he met Kay Metz, a minister's daughter whose stability offered something he'd never known: unconditional support. Kay saw through his nervous exterior to the tender heart beneath. She believed in his talent when he barely believed in himself. Their courtship was sweet and simple, built on shared dreams and gentle encouragement. They married young, two hopefuls from small-town America ready to chase something bigger. With Kay beside him, Don made his second attempt at New York. This time he was older, wiser, and armed with war-tested confidence. The city still had teeth, but now he knew how to bite back, one joke at a time. Late 1940s New York was a city of smoke-filled comedy clubs and cramped apartments where aspiring performers lived on coffee and determination. Don and Kay struggled through rejection after rejection, barely making rent, surviving on love and stubbornness. But each failed audition taught him something. Each dismissive casting director helped him refine his approach. Slowly, painfully, he began to understand what made him unique. His first break came through radio, a recurring role on Bobby Benson, and the B-Bar B writers playing Windy Wales, a fast-talking sidekick whose nervous energy hinted at the character who would eventually make him famous. Radio taught him vocal timing, how to convey emotion through inflection alone, how to make listeners see his facial expressions through sound. Television came next, small parts that gradually grew larger. Search for Tomorrow gave him steady work and visibility. Then came The Steve Allen Show, where his particular brand of neurotic comedy finally found its audience. His bug-eyed reactions, his trembling voice, his ability to transform genuine anxiety into comic rhythm, all of it clicked. America was watching, and America was laughing. But his real breakthrough came on Broadway. No Time for Sergeants paired him with another rising talent, Andy Griffith. The chemistry between them was immediate and electric. Griffith's country boy charm playing perfectly against Knotts' nervous energy. Night after night, they discovered what made audiences roar, building a comedic partnership that felt destined for something bigger. The show was a hit, running for years, and establishing both men as formidable talents. Critics praised Knotz's impeccable timing, his physical comedy, his ability to generate sympathy even while playing a fool. Hollywood took notice, television executives took notice, and somewhere in those standing ovations, Don Knotts stopped being just another struggling actor and became something else entirely, a star waiting to be born. Two rising talents, one unbreakable friendship, and a destiny about to unfold in a fictional town called Mayberry. The year was 1960. Don Knotts sat watching television when Andy Griffith's new show premiered, a quiet little program about a small-town sheriff. On impulse, Don called his old friend and joked, "You know, Ange, you need a deputy." He meant it as a gag. Andy heard it as inspiration. Thus was born Barney Fife, the bumbling, self-important, deeply lovable deputy whose heart perpetually exceeded his competence. Don approached the role with meticulous precision, rewriting lines to sharpen the comedy, testing gestures in front of mirrors, building Barney's nervous energy into timing so precise it became legendary. He understood something fundamental. Barney had to be foolish but never stupid, incompetent but never malicious. The character needed to fail while making audiences root for his success. The formula worked spectacularly. Within months, Barney Fife became America's favorite sidekick. Don won Emmy after Emmy, 5 in total, a testament to his transformative performance. On set, he and Andy created magic through deep understanding and genuine affection. They pranked each other, improvised brilliantly, and built a brotherhood that transcended professional partnership. But while audiences saw only joy, Don's personal life was quietly collapsing. The pressure of weekly television, the perfectionism that made him brilliant but exhausted him, the anxiety that never fully quieted, it all took its toll. His marriage to Kay began fraying under the weight of his demons. Fame amplified rather than silenced his insecurities. Success, he discovered, didn't cure childhood trauma. It just gave him a bigger audience to hide from. Behind the scenes, Don battled anxiety attacks that left him paralyzed. He relied increasingly on medication to calm the storms in his mind. His children saw not the beloved deputy, but a haunted perfectionist struggling to find peace. The man who made millions laugh each week couldn't always laugh himself. By the time he decided to leave Mayberry after 5 seasons, he was both at his creative peak and his emotional breaking point. America adored Barney Fife, but Don Knotts' own world was quietly falling apart. To understand Don Knotts is to understand the spiral, that terrible loop where anxiety feeds on itself, where every worry becomes a catastrophe, where the body betrays the mind and the mind torments the body. Before performances that made him famous, Don would lie in bed, gripped by paralysis, convinced he couldn't move, couldn't breathe, couldn't possibly walk onto that set and be funny. The pills helped, temporarily. They dulled the sharp edges of panic, made the world feel slightly less threatening. But they also dimmed something essential, that spark that made his comedy electric. He walked a constant tightrope between medication and madness, trying to find the exact dosage that would quiet the fear without killing the genius. His hypochondria became another demon. Every ache signaled cancer. Every irregular heartbeat meant death. Every headache portended catastrophe. Doctors assured him he was healthy, but their words couldn't penetrate the certainty of his own dread. He convinced himself he was dying so often that the real threat, when it eventually came, almost felt like vindication. Therapy helped some. So did prayer, though his conversations with God often took the form of angry demands for relief rather than humble supplication. He wanted peace, but couldn't imagine what it would feel like. Calm seemed like a foreign country whose language he'd never learned. The cruelest irony was that performing, the thing that caused so much anxiety, was also sometimes the only thing that saved him. On stage or in front of cameras, playing Barney or any other character, he could escape himself. Laughter from the audience provided temporary relief, proof that he had value, that his suffering produced something worthwhile. Karen would later reflect that her father's pain fueled his art in ways both beautiful and terrible. His ability to portray anxiety so convincingly came from intimate knowledge. His comedy about fear resonated because it was real, filtered through craft but rooted in authentic suffering. To the world, Don Knotts was fearless, willing to look foolish, to play the coward, to strip away masculine pride for the sake of a laugh. To himself, he was one panic attack away from complete collapse, constantly performing the ultimate trick, convincing everyone he was okay when he rarely felt okay at all. The decision to leave the Andy Griffith Show shocked America. Barney Fife was iconic, the show was a phenomenon, and Don seemed perfectly positioned to ride that success for years. But behind the scenes, the situation was more complicated. Don believed the show would end after 5 seasons. That was the original plan. He'd signed a movie contract with Universal Studios, eager to prove himself beyond television, to show Hollywood he could carry films as a leading man. By the time Andy decided to continue the show, Don was contractually bound to his new commitment. But money and contracts weren't the whole story. The truth, as Karen would later reveal, was simpler and sadder. Television was grinding him down. The weekly pressure, the endless performances, the exhaustion of maintaining excellence season after season, it had consumed him. Leaving felt less like abandonment and more like survival. Viewers felt betrayed. Letters poured in demanding Barney's return. Even occasional guest appearances couldn't fill the void his absence created. Andy missed him too, not just professionally, but personally. The show continued successfully, but something irreplaceable was gone. Don stepped into Universal's bright lights, hoping to reinvent himself, to escape the shadow of Deputy Fife, to find new challenges that would reignite his passion. He was searching for peace, for validation beyond television, for proof that he was more than a one-trick pony. He left Mayberry in search of renewal, but what he found was a different kind of loneliness. The isolation of discovering that perfection isn't transferable, that lightning doesn't strike twice, and that sometimes our greatest role finds us only once. Don Knotts tried desperately to shed his nervous sidekick image. Universal cast him as a romantic lead in The Love God, attempting to transform America's favorite coward into a bachelor playboy. The disconnect was jarring for audiences who couldn't imagine Barney Fife as a ladies' man, no matter how the script insisted. Off-screen, Don possessed surprising charm. He was attentive, funny in intimate ways that differed from his public persona, genuinely interested in others. Women found him magnetic despite, or perhaps because of, his vulnerability. But the chasm between who he was and who Hollywood wanted him to be created constant friction. His post-Mayberry films had mixed results. The incredible Mr. Limpet found modest success by leaning into his natural awkwardness. The Reluctant Astronaut similarly worked because it let him play to type. Fearful, overwhelmed, ultimately lovable. Audiences loved Don Knotts when he was essentially playing variations of himself. They resisted when studios tried making him something else. His personal life reflected similar patterns. After divorcing Kay, he married Laura Lee Suchna. Finding brief happiness before depression and career doubts overwhelmed the relationship. He wanted companionship but struggled with intimacy. He craved stability, but his inner turmoil made stability impossible. The film career he'd left television for never quite materialized the way he'd hoped. There were hits and memorable roles, but nothing approached the cultural impact of Barney Fife. He'd traded television's relentless grind for Hollywood's fickle indifference, discovering that fame is easier to achieve than sustain and impossible to control. Success, he learned again and again, never silenced his inner trembling. It only gave that trembling a larger stage, a bigger audience, more witnesses to his perpetual struggle between the man he appeared to be and the frightened child he'd never stopped being. The diagnosis came like a punchline with terrible timing: macular degeneration. For a performer whose comedy relied on physical precision and perfect timing, losing eyesight meant losing everything. Don spiraled into despair, convinced his career was over, that the final cruel joke would be darkness. Surgery provided unexpected mercy. His vision returned, a second chance he'd barely dared hope for. He saw it as symbolic, a message that perhaps he still had work to do, performances yet to give. Relief flooded through him, gratitude for reprieve. But fate wasn't finished. Lung cancer followed, a diagnosis that carried no second chances, no surgical fixes. Despite having quit smoking years earlier, the damage had already been done. His body was collecting debts his younger self had incurred. He made a decision that characterized his entire life. He refused to tell his children immediately. He wanted to spare them worry, to control the narrative, to keep them laughing rather than pitying. Even facing mortality, Don Knotts was directing the show, managing the audience, trying to craft the perfect ending. There were small moments of defiance, joking with doctors, signing autographs at treatment centers, calling Andy to reminisce about old times. He refused to let cancer become his defining characteristic. He'd spent his life being Barney Fife. He wouldn't spend his death being a victim. The treatments were brutal, but he endured them with the same determination that had carried him from West Virginia poverty to Hollywood success. He'd beaten blindness through sheer luck and medical skill. Cancer, however, played by different rules. This time itself was the enemy, and time always wins eventually. Into Don's declining years walked Francie Yarborough, decades his junior, initially just an assistant, but gradually becoming something more. Their relationship surprised everyone, including perhaps themselves. She saw past the legend to the vulnerable man beneath, and he found in her something he'd searched for his entire life: unconditional acceptance. They married in 2002, a union that raised eyebrows but brought Don genuine peace. Francie stayed through chemotherapy, through decline, through the inevitable slide toward the end. She became his advocate, his protector, his final love story. As his body failed, his humor persisted, maybe even intensified, as though comedy was the last defense against oblivion. He pranked nurses, delivered one-liners to visitors, turned his hospital room into a stage. If he was going to die, he'd do it his way, laughing. His home became his final venue, with family gathering not for Death Watch, but for what felt like one extended performance. Don understood something most people don't. Death doesn't have to be only somber. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is refuse to let mortality steal your joy. And when the spotlight dimmed for the last time, Don Knotts gave one final performance, the one that would haunt and heal his daughter for years to come. The hospital room in 2006 held the usual suspects of death's approach: machines beeping, family gathered, the weight of goodbye pressing down on everyone. Don lay in bed, his breathing shallow but his eyes still carrying that familiar twinkle. Everyone knew this was the end. What they didn't expect was how it would unfold. Even in his final hours, Don cracked jokes. Not gentle, sentimental observations, but genuine, absurd comedy that made his family laugh despite themselves. Karen stood by his bedside, tears streaming down her face while simultaneously laughing so hard she could barely breathe. The disconnect between what was happening, her father dying, and what she was feeling, hysterical laughter, became unbearable. She fled the room, ashamed, convinced she was the worst daughter in history for laughing as her father died. How could she? What kind of person finds comedy in death? The awful truth Karen eventually revealed wasn't tragedy. It was irony wrapped in understanding. Her father's final act wasn't a peaceful goodbye or tearful reconciliation. It was performance. He spent his last conscious moments doing exactly what he'd done his entire life, making people laugh. And he was brilliant at it, right up to his final breath. Years later, Karen confessed her guilt to audiences, expecting judgment. Instead, she found understanding, because what she eventually realized transformed her grief. Her father gave his family exactly what he always gave the world: laughter in the face of fear, joy in the presence of pain, proof that comedy could conquer even death. He was literally dying, and he made us hysterical, she says now, no longer ashamed but awed. The awful truth is that Don Knotts didn't know how to die any other way. He was a comedian first, last, and always. And his final performance, making his family laugh through their tears, might have been his greatest. If she could go back, Karen says now, she'd stay in that room and laugh. She'd understand that laughter wasn't disrespect but tribute, not betrayal, but exactly what he wanted. He'd spent his life giving people permission to laugh at fear, and in his final moments, he gave that same gift to his own children. There's a sacred quality to the reunion of old friends who've shared something profound. When Andy Griffith visited Don's bedside for the last time, it wasn't actor visiting actor. It was brother visiting brother, two souls forged in laughter facing the inevitable end. Andy leaned close, his voice gentle, and whispered, "Keep breathing, Jess." The use of Don's birth name, Jesse, carried weight beyond words. It was recognition of the man beneath the characters, an acknowledgement that before there was Barney and Andy, there were two dreamers who'd found each other and created magic. Don's shoulder moved slightly, the faintest acknowledgement. Perhaps he couldn't speak anymore, but that small movement said everything. "I hear you. I know you. Thank you for being here." Griffith later reflected on that moment with characteristic restraint. He knew the end had come, knew he was saying goodbye to his creative partner, his friend, his brother in all but blood. But there was peace in it too, the comfort of being present, of having said what needed saying, of letting a great soul depart knowing it was loved. No drama, no theatrical farewells, just two men who'd made America laugh for years, sharing one final moment of profound connection. It was the perfect ending to their story, understated, genuine, and filled with unspoken love. Today, a statue of Don Knotts stands in Morgantown, West Virginia, bronze capturing his bug-eyed expression for eternity. Reruns of The Andy Griffith Show still air daily, introducing new generations to Barney Fife. The laughter he created decades ago continues echoing through living rooms across America. Karen Knotts now tours the country performing her one-woman show about her father, transforming her grief into tribute, her memories into art. She's discovered what her father always knew, that sharing stories creates connection, that vulnerability builds community, that laughter heals wounds we didn't know we carried. Modern comedians cite Don Knotts as an influence, his willingness to look foolish, his mastery of physical comedy, his proof that vulnerability could be power rather than weakness. He showed generations of performers that you didn't need to be the hero to be beloved, that supporting roles could steal shows, that making others look good was its own form of greatness. His legacy extends beyond technique to something more fundamental. Don Knotts taught America that fear could be funny, that anxiety didn't have to be hidden, that our weaknesses could become our greatest strengths. In an era that demanded masculine stoicism, he offered something radical: permission to be afraid and still be loved. He entered the world frightened and left it laughing. Between those two moments, he created characters that will outlive us all, gifted joy to millions who desperately needed it, and proved that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is let people see you tremble. The awful truth his daughter finally shared isn't awful at all. It's beautiful. Don Knotts died exactly as he lived, making people laugh, refusing to let fear win, transforming pain into something transcendent. And in the end, that trembling voice and bug-eyed stare concealed the heart of a lion who conquered his demons by inviting the world to laugh at them alongside him. What did Don Knotts mean to you? Perhaps that's the final question worth asking, because for a generation of Americans, he meant comfort, laughter, and the revolutionary idea that you didn't have to be perfect to be loved. You just had to be human, gloriously, imperfectly, courageously human.